eviction. There's so many issues regards to renting in Ghana, but today we're specifically zeroing in on eviction. And to help us do that, we have Clara Berry Kasati. She's the managing partner at Casa Law Firm. Thank you very much for joining us, Clara.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're speaking on eviction today. And under the law, does the law provide, is there a provision, for instance, the number of days a landlord can give a tenant before they are evicted?
Yes, the law provides for notice, what we call notice. Okay, that is the number of days that a landlord is required to inform a tenant that they no longer would be holding the premises after a certain point. The first default usually is when they have a contract. If the parties have a contract, they would have stated in the contract how many days notice should be given. In that case, the landlord has to comply with that notice. But where they do not provide, the law provides for several instances.
Such as?
It depends on whether the tenancy is a year-by-year tenancy or is a month-by-month tenancy, what we call a yearly tenancy or a monthly tenancy. If it is a yearly tenancy, for example, the landlord must give at least six months notice before the eviction. If it is a monthly notice, the landlord must give at least 1 month notice.
Right.
And if it is a weekly notice, the landlord must give at least 1 week notice.
Okay. Now, this is a situation whereby ideally the law provides that we're supposed to pay not more than 6 months advance.
Exactly.
However, in practice, it's usually an average of 2 years.
Yes.
So if I'm sitting, I've paid my 2 years advance, and then I'm sitting in my house, and one day the landlord walks away and says, "Oh, Solace, I'm sorry, I have a son coming down from the UK, and I want to give this place to him because I don't have anywhere else to put him." And I've just done, say, 8 months of the 2 years. What do I do? Does he have a right to do that? And
he has a right to inform you that he would want the premises for his son who is returning from the UK, but he must give you the required period of notice. That is one. And that is his right to inform you and to give you the required period of notice. Now, your right is also two. One, your right is to either accept, agree with him and give him the premises, or to disagree.
So I can actually say, no, I'm not giving it to you.
Yes, you can say
really?
You can say I'm not giving it to you for whatever reasons. If you give it to him peacefully, that is fine. But if you don't give it to him peacefully, he has to go to court.
But he will insist, it's my house. I built it with my own money. And
he has to go to court for an order to get it back from you. And when he goes to court for an order to get it back from you, the court will look at your circumstances, look at his circumstances. The court will compare between the two of you who has an alternative source of accommodation.
Right.
Or who would it be harder on. So when the two of you arrive in court, the court would balance the situation and look at who would suffer most, the balance of hardship. And then the court would give an order whether to allow the tenant to continue to live in the premises or to allow the landlord to take the premises. But the landlord cannot force the tenant out of the premises.
So, for instance, if I get home and he's already given me this, he's told me this, and then I say no, and then I get home and then my things are packed out of the house, what do I do?
The landlord would have breached the law. The landlord,
which law?
The Rent Act, for
right.
example. Because the Rent Act provides circumstances under which he can take the possession, he can take back the premises from you. Even though requiring the premises for his family member is one of the circumstances under which he's entitled to recover, he can only do that peacefully or by court order, not by force. So where he has told you and you say, nope, I'm not moving, and then he forcefully goes into the premises to pack your things out, he would have breached the law. He would have trespassed into the premises. Because at the time he gave the premises to you, you are entitled to what we call quiet possession.
Quiet possession.
Quiet possession, which
no
means
issues.
You should have your privacy. You should be able to live in the premises in peace and have your privacy without the landlord intruding anytime he or she wishes.
So in a situation like that, if I get home and my things are outside, what should be the first thing I do? Like what do I
You can report to the police. You can.
And what do I say when I get to the police station?
You tell them what has happened.
My landlord has,
exactly. You can go to the rent control and tell the rent control what has happened. The rent control officers have the power to stop the landlord from forcefully evicting you from the premises. They would listen to the two of you, and then they decide how to let the case progress. But you can either go to the police or go to the rent control.
Let's look at some of the conditions under which a landlord can rightfully evict a tenant.
Yes.
give us, you know, just a brief.
An example is when the rent is due and owing for at least 1 month. So the day the rent became due, that's not the day that the landlord is entitled to recover possession. The landlord is recovered 1 month after the rent became due.
1 month after.
1 month
so if
after.
I paid for, okay,
if you were supposed to pay at the end of November,
okay,
then at the end of the November you haven't paid, the landlord would have a cause of action against you at the end of December. Exactly.
Right. So I can owe for 3 weeks and then probably pay that third, fourth week.
Exactly.
Right.
So if you haven't paid rent, and secondly, if you are using, if you are in the premises and you are committing nuisance to your neighbors.
And what would you classify as nuisance?
It depends on the facts. There is a case in which one of the court held that pounding fufu at the top floor at certain hours is nuisance. If you are in a story building and you are at the top floor and you are pounding fufu at certain hours, it's a nuisance to your neighbors. So nuisance depends on the facts. Also, if the premises are being used for immoral or illegal purposes, for example, a brothel,
okay,
the landlord will be entitled to apply to recover possession of such premises.
Would selling alcohol, does it classify as
it depends. Selling alcohol depends on the nature of the premises and whether or not you have the required license to sell the alcohol. But a more outright case would have been something like using an illegal purpose like drugs. Okay. If the premises is being used to house drugs, for example.
And can that kind of eviction be instant, like today?
If it's illegal.
No. So for instance, you mentioned brothel and drug.
The landlord has to go to court.
In all so if I walk in,
yes,
I'm a landlord, and I walk in on my tenant, and he's engaging in, say, child pornography or something of the sort. I can't evict him there and then.
You can tell him you want to evict him. If he says fine, then you can evict him there and then. But if you want to evict him and he says nope, I'm not leaving, you have to go to court. You cannot force him out of the premise.
So regardless of the situation, regardless of what he's doing or what he's up to, I don't have a right to evict him instantly.
You have a right, like that's why you have two options. You can evict him peacefully.
Right.
But you can't forcefully evict him. You can only forcefully evict him if you have a court order. So you have two options. Evict him peacefully. If he doesn't resist eviction, you evict him peacefully. But if you can't evict him peacefully, you have to go to court. You need a court order to evict him.
So if I disagree, I say I'm not going to go, and then the landlord comes every morning and he's banging on my door. Solace, leave, leave, leave. I want my son to come, and they do that. I mean, that's
wrong. I understand that they do that a lot. That is wrong. No landlord is entitled to. I understand some landlord even come around anytime they feel like coming around.
They come at 2 a.m. They can come at 5 a.m. They can be waiting for you at your door.
No. Once you give a premises to someone, that person is entitled to quiet possession. If the person is renting the premises from you, the person is entitled to quiet possession. The person is entitled to their privacy. The landlord is entitled to make inspections at periodic times, but that is agreed with the tenant. You agree on the times that the landlord, on reasonable hours.
Still on Chamber, and we've been talking about eviction and the rights of landlords as well as tenants when it comes to eviction. Now, we've so far spoken about the landlords in the negative light. Let's look at the tenants in the negative light. So the landlord has served notice, he's done all the right things, he's giving you the time. What do you do as a landlord when your tenant just refuses to budge?
If your tenant refuses, there's a lot of obligation on the landlord in that circumstances, unfortunately, because our laws puts our laws in terms of the Rent Act seems to favor the tenant a little bit more.
Really?
Yes, it does, because the law takes the view that, or the legislature took the view that the tenant is the vulnerable party in this relationship. So it's gone a step further to try to protect the landlord. So even where the tenant is doing something wrong, maybe something that the landlord doesn't like, the landlord still has an obligation to give a written notice. The landlord can't just go and verbally say that, well, I can see that you're doing something wrong here, this, that. The landlord has to give a written notice to the tenant. In that written notice, the landlord has to clearly specify what the tenant is doing wrong. The landlord must tell the tenant to remedy whatever they are doing wrong, and then the tenant may actually add compensation, of course, unless it has to do with rent, for whatever wrong that they are doing. But the effect of the notice is that the landlord must make it very clear to the tenant what they are doing wrong and how they can correct it. It is only after that, and then the tenant has received the notice and hasn't done it, then the landlord can evict the tenant. That is either by peacefully taking the premises back or going to court for an order of recovery of possession, as we call it.
Order of recovery of
possession. Yes, to recover the premises from the landlord, from the tenant.
The tenant.
Yes.
Okay. So now let's look at a situation whereby you've rented the house the apartments for 3 years, and then your landlord comes up and says, okay, I need to sell this house.
Yes.
And so you need to move. And I've probably stayed in it for about 3 months, okay, even though I've probably paid for 3 years.
Okay.
Do I get compensation in terms of refund?
Definitely. If you agree,
am I entitled to it?
You are entitled to it. If you agree to leave the premises for the landlord, you are entitled to whatever money that you would have paid, or you would have already paid to the landlord. Depending on the kind of arrangement you had with the landlord, if the landlord was not entitled to ask you at that point, the landlord should actually, in addition to refunding the money that you pay to him, you could ask for compensation for the inconvenience that would be caused to you to have to look for alternative accommodation.
Oh, I mean, not just the inconvenience. Imagine if I know that, okay, I've paid my 3 years, I am fine. I don't have to think about accommodation for the next 3 years. And then and I've renovated, I've painted, I've done so much, I've propped up my room quite nicely, you know. And then 3-4 months into the agreement or the tenancy, you come and then you say you're selling the house. Look, just imagine the traumatic experience I would have to go through. Because usually, the truth is, we face a lot of problems when we are looking for apartments. Okay. So you've gone through all the hustle with middlemen and agents, and then finally, and then just as you felt you were okay, is there any compensation for psychological trauma? It's not
compulsory for you to give it up just because your landlord says, I'm selling the house. It's not compulsory. No, it's not compulsory.
So I can actually stop him in a way from selling the house.
He can sell the house, but whoever is buying the house will have to buy the house knowing that there's a tenant in the house, and then would have to be made aware of the conditions of the tenancy.
Oh, okay, wait. Let me get
your landlord would have just changed.
Oh, so I can still be in the house, but my landlord
would have just changed. So it's not compulsory for you to leave. If you decide to leave, you are entitled to whatever you have paid. And again, if the situation where the landlord would have actually been entitled to,
how much of it are we talking about? Do I get
no? If you stayed for 3 months, at least you don't get the 3 months that you stayed for.
Yeah, but what happens to my renovations and my painting and the things I've fixed?
You can ask for compensation. It's not compulsory for you to go, but if you decide to leave, then you can ask for compensation. You can ask for compensation for the inconvenience, to refunds for all the investments you've made in the premises. But just because the landlord decides that they are selling the premises, if your tenancy is not, it hasn't expired. If your agreement with him has not expired, he's not entitled to evict you because he's selling. He can still sell the house
without a contract.
Without a contract, yes, it's not advisable.
Between, the tenant and the landlord.
It's not advisable to enter into a tenancy agreement without any contract at all. You can have a contract. The contract may not provide for everything, but you should, especially where the agreement is going to be for more than 3 years. If it is less than 3 years, that is fine. But if you intended the agreement to be for more than 3 years, it must be in writing.
Right. So in a situation where, say, I was in such a hurry, I was desperate, and I got it from someone who knows someone who knows someone, and then I end up, and so probably I'm not even the direct, person who signed the contract. What do I do?
You would have to be able to prove that you're the tenant. So you would have to be, of course, if in that case, we have the tenant and we have the subtenant.
Okay,
the tenant is the person who contracts with the landlord directly.
Okay, so I go to the landlord, I want an apartment, 3 years.
Yes. The landlord gives you the apartment.
And then I give it to, say, my sister or my friend.
Your sister is a subtenant. Right. We would call that a sublessee.
Right.
In law, that is a sublessee. They hold it through you. Now, it is incumbent on you to have made your landlord aware that you were leasing the premises to a somebody else. You are going to do a sublease, and then the landlord would have consented. If the landlord is aware that this person is taking it from you, even when you and the landlord have a fallout, and the landlord had already consented for this other sublessee to be on it, and you and the landlord have a fallout, and the landlord is able to evict you from the premises, more or less, now you cease to be a landlord. Because between you and the sublessee, you are in the position of a landlord. Between you and the sublessee. Right. What happens is that you drop out. But the sublessee can continue and then have that relationship with the landlord. So the landlord would have changed, but the tenant would still be there.
Okay, now how about the kind of tenancy agreement where it's not really fixed? In 3 months, something else comes up and he adds another clause, or your landlord comes and say, okay, you can do this for a period. And then 6 months later, he comes and say, no, you can't do that anymore.
The law generally doesn't allow for one party to be arbitrary when it comes to those kind of agreements. If you have a written agreement, the agreement would have provided for when changes can be made. If you don't have an agreement, you can always imply from the law. And then the law doesn't allow unilateral arbitrary actions from either side. So it has to be by mutual agreement between the landlord and the tenant.
No, let's go back to the major thing, which is the notice.
The notice.
Now, if I am, me being the tenant, sorry, and I decide, oh, I've gotten a new house, I've bought a house or something, and I'm not able to go through the whole 2 years that I've paid, and say 6 months. And then you as the landlord, probably you've used the money I gave you for something else. And I go, I'm like, oh no, Clara, I'm moving out maybe say in 3 weeks because I got a house and I need my money back. How much notice do I need to give you, one? And how much time do I give you to refund the money? And what rights do we have in that situation?
Let me take the first time. How many days notice you should give? It depends again on the type of tenancy. If it is a yearly tenancy, as we said, it cuts both ways. If it's a yearly tenancy, the tenant must also give 6 months notice.
6 months notice.
6 months notice.
That I will be leaving. Oh, exactly. I just won the lottery and my house just popped up in the corner.
The landlord is entitled to 6 months notice. So you can't recover anything outside of the 6 months notice. You will lose your 6 months rent because the landlord is entitled to a minimum of 6 months notice.
So even if I've done 3 months and then I want to leave, he's going to pay me only 6 months.
No, you are supposed to give him 6 months notice.
That's what I'm saying. So even if I've done 3 months, I've lived in the house for 3 months. Say I rented it for 2 years, I'm supposed to give him 6 months notice before I leave.
Exactly.
But then I won the lottery and I have a house at Fasaka.
You will lose that rent.
All of it.
Up to
if I've already paid.
It depends on how many notice you give him. Like I said, he's entitled to 6 months. If you give him 1 month notice, you will lose the 5 months. If you give him 2 months, you will lose the 4 months. So yes, anything.
So the 6 months is his.
It's his.
It's automatic.
It is automatic. He's entitled to 6 months notice. Now, if you don't give him 6 month notice, he cannot suffer an inconvenience and a detriment because you breached the contract. If you breach the contract, you should be the one suffering the consequences of the breach, not him.
Right.
Yes.
I have learned so much today, and I'm sure you out there have learned as much as I have. We've had in the studio talking about eviction and the rights of both landlords and tenants when it comes to eviction with regards to renting in Ghana. We've had Clara Berry Kasati, the managing partner at Casa Law Firm. Thank you so very much for making it. Thank you. You taught us a lot today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed being here.